Welcome to episode 18 of the Pollination Podcast. Today, I'll be interviewing Brent Nixon, a beekeeper from Australia. All right, so today I've got Brent Nixon from Australia. Brent Nixon is a sideliner beekeeper who specializes in queen cells and mated queen production. And take it away, Brent, and tell me a little bit about yourself and what it's like down there in the Southern Hemisphere.
Thanks, Matt. I love your podcast. Thanks for having me on. I was actually listening to an episode the other day, the episode where you were talking about the economics of beekeeping. Really, really good. Great episode. I think, really cool to hear that stuff.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm in Australia, and we've just recently had Varroa, so that's what it's like for us. I think I'm not that scared, just because I think everyone in the world's got it, so we'll adapt and we'll learn. But yeah, it's going to be scary that first day when I open up the drone comb and I see it there for the first time. So yeah, have you ever seen bees without Varroa?
I mean, after I blasted them with 3 or 4 rounds of medication, yeah, they're probably temporarily Varroa free.
Okay,
But
right.
I've never like just seen a colony. When I open a colony, I always assume they have mites. If I don't see it, and the alcohol wash doesn't is rolling a zero, I always assume the mites are there. Or if they're not, they'll be there tomorrow. That's how it is here.
Yeah, so that's the new thing that we're all trying to deal with down here. And yeah, it's going to be a very big learning curve. So any tips you've got for me, I'd really appreciate it.
Man, find a guy in Mexico who can smuggle you in some pure Amatraz. That's probably the best result.
Oh, really? So that's what you do?
That's not what I do because that would be illegal, and I would certainly never admit to that on a podcast. But a lot of commercial beekeepers that I know do use concentrated Amatraz. They usually mix it with vegetable oil, and then they soak it with like paper towels,
Okay,
and
yeah.
then you put those in. That's the way to go. I mean, of course, you've got Apivar and oxalic and formic and all those different medications.
Yeah. So Amatraz, that's pretty much the active ingredient in Apivar, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's kind of I mean, there's no silver bullet for mines, but that's kind of it's our main ammunition against it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of studies coming out now. They're showing the mites are beginning to develop a resistance to it.
Oh,
And
really?
if that happens, oh yeah, it's small traces, which, now there's a lot of research being done into the Varroa sensitive hygienic genetics for
Mm-hmm.
bees, and it's promising, but as far as I know, there's no honeybee that's 100% immune to it. We have a little bit of those genetics mixed into our stock, and you can kind of see it. They'll start chewing open the cap brood cappings. They'll start pulling out the drone pupa if they're infected, and I've seen them just chew down the drone pupa down to like just like its bottom abdomen part, and then they'll pull it out and fly it away out of the hive. So those
Mm-hmm.
are some of the traits, but I mean, if I didn't medicate constantly, it wouldn't be nowhere near enough. In fact, the only benefit I've seen with our stock, which is not pure VSH or anything, but the main benefit is that it notifies me that there's mites because I pull a frame of cat brood, I see the chewing on the brood cappings, and I go, okay, I need to do an alcohol wash or just shoot, I need to medicate them right now because they just grow so exponentially that if you have mites today, you have a pandemic tomorrow. That's just kind of how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So I've got a podcast as well, the Breeding the Honeybee, and I've talked to a couple of people about the VSH genes. And the most difficult thing about doing interviews about that stuff is not saying VHS.
It is, yeah, it is so hard, yeah.
Because if you grew up in the 90s, like it's like, oh, VHS tapes.
Yeah, your brain doesn't
So
want to say it.
yeah, so every time I interviewed someone who was doing that, I'm like, oh, great, I didn't say that. So I had Corey Stevens on, and also had Kirk Webster talking about treatment free, and it's really interesting. And I think it's interesting how, and as we don't really have Varroa yet, we haven't sort of developed those opinions much here. But it seems like in the States, there's some people who are really for it, and some people who are really against it. And
Hmm.
there's not a lot of people in the middle, which is very interesting. Why do you think that is?
It's man, it's like talking to someone who's like really hyper organic, like they're all about organic farming, and then you have like the larger, more commercial type farmers trying to have that conversation. And honestly, you know what it sounds just like to me? I don't know if you guys had it in Australia, but we certainly had it here in the US. You had that pro versus anti-vaccine, the COVID vaccine. It's like that same division.
Mhm.
People want to reduce, and probably is very reasonable. They want to reduce the amount of chemicals that they're taking into their system. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think a lot of people see honeybees as they see honey as a health food. They see honeybees as this very natural um, part of nature, I suppose. And and a lot of people just are hobbyists, I think too. They have one or two beehives and they're like pets and they want to have this organic food coming in and it's hard for me as a commercial beekeeper because I'm trying to run heavy numbers. I'm focusing on production, efficiency, and you do have to rely on a lot of medications when you start getting into the commercial scale. I just don't know. I don't personally think you could be commercial and be treatment free. I also don't think you could be commercial and be purely organic. I could be wrong, but I never met one and I don't know how they would do it. So we have to rely on a lot of those synthetic medications like Amitraz. And there's a lot of research that shows Amitraz is bad for humans and bees. I mean, Amitraz definitely is, I know over here it's scheduled as a human carcinogen for sure. It's definitely builds up in the beeswax. It can contaminate your honey. Of course, you're digesting that, you're eating it, so you're bringing into those toxins in your body to some degree. Now, if you sell your honey to a large honey packer, say like Barkman Honey, they test for Amitraz, and there are federal guidelines over here. And as long as you're within the under those federal guidelines, the government considers it safe. Now, what an individual considers their own, their own right, I suppose. Um, and it's not good. And I was looking at a study the other day too that Amitraz really reduces the viability of the drone, of the male bee. So that will impact your queen longevity and her health and her ability to just live for longer and be more productive. So it's not a nice thing. I'll tell you, like when we use Apivar, I don't touch it just to be safe. I always have latex gloves. I don't touch my smoker. I don't touch my hive tool. I don't want it anywhere near me. And I do the same with like oxalic or formic if I'm doing the organic medications. I don't want that stuff on my skin. Um, and I think that's kind of where it stems from. That was a long answer, but it's just a matter, I think, of what people want in their food and on their pets, I would even say. And
Mhm.
um, and it's not perfect. I know nobody's going to sit here and say, yeah, you should go, take a shower with Amatraz. That would be crazy. Everybody knows it's not good. But
Mm.
the alternative is what? To be fully treatment free? Well, like I just said, that's not possible at scale. To be organic, or the organic chemicals are pretty nasty too. I burned all the skin off my hands, I think my first year of beekeeping, because I grabbed some formic acid pads and nobody told me. Although maybe the acid should have probably clued me off in the name. I just grabbed them with my goatskin gloves and they literally, my skin was peeling off my fingers for like days. Like it was like bananas. I could just pull all the
Uh,
skin off my hand. It was terrible.
ouch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so any chemical has, pros and cons, I think. And I will say that is the kind of the beautiful thing with about beekeeping and the very frustrating thing about beekeeping is that it has such a wide range of options. And it just depends on the beekeeper and what they want to do with their bees. Um, if that answers the question, that was a long answer. So,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I had Adam Finkelstein on my podcast, and he said it's totally possible to be treatment free over a long period of time. He hasn't treated for a long time. He's a VSH queen breeder, and Kirk Webster, I had him on recently, hasn't treated for, I think it was 20 years. And he said the same thing.
wow.
He said the day when he started to wear gloves to do his treatments and he thought, this is crazy. I can't do this anymore. So he sort of went down that path. So it'd be interesting to see if we do get to a point where it could become commercial. In my case, our friends in New Zealand. So New Zealand's really close to us, and we do a lot of sort of chatting about this with people from New Zealand. And they said that every year Varroa gets harder to manage. They've had it for 20 years, and they said it's not like, every year it's easier and you kind of learn. They said it seems to get stronger every year. Would you agree with that?
Um, I've heard that from the older beekeepers. I've only been doing it for 8 years. So in my short time period of experience, I haven't seen any difference.
Mhm.
I kind of feel the opposite just from my own personal, and this is just directly related to me gaining experience, is that I've become better at identifying it, and I've become better at using different medications to try and stamp it down, and my treatment regimens have gotten a little better. But I don't think that has anything to do with Varroa. It has everything to do with just me learning how to combat them better. But I do hear from the guys that have been doing it for like 20, 30 years. They very much have said that. So it may very well may be true. What we need is we just need, I mean, yeah, obviously a bee that's resistant to it genetically would be, I think, would be the holy grail. And we may get there one day from what my understanding is, looking at the research and talking to other queen breeders. But right now we just need an active chemical, unfortunately, to treat them. That's my belief. And if Amitraz does go out on us, we're all going to be in a tremendous amount of trouble. Um, I can go run out there and blast them with vaporized oxalic acid, and that's an organic treatment. You can even do that during the honey flow if you wanted, because it's a natural component of honey in the human diet. But it's not practical again at scale because you've got to blast those hives like every 3 to 5 days for multiple weeks at a time. Like if you start running in thousands of colonies, that's just not possible to hit that many. It takes me a month to get around to my colonies. Hitting them once a week or twice a week, that's just not physically possible. Even if I hired somebody only to do that, I don't even know if they could really do it, not effectively. And I just don't know. I mean, I know there's a lot of research being put into honeybees and the combating the varroa mite. I'll tell you what really worries me too is they have the other mite where over in Asia, I can never pronounce it's like Tropholepis or something. Now that mite is going to be way worse than the varroa mite, and it hasn't gotten here, at least to the U.S. yet, in my knowledge. But that's going to be absolutely devastating because I think they don't spend as much time out on the comers. The bee inspector was telling me like the Amitraz won't be as effective because I want to say they spend more time inside the caproot or something. It'll mess up our treatment cycles basically, and and I don't think Amitraz is very effective against them to begin with. So he actually came and took for the first time I'd ever seen it. He came and sampled some of my bees a couple weeks ago for that mite, and and they just sent it off to a lab. I haven't gotten the results back, which I don't think I have it because it's nobody's seen it here yet. But um, he said that's going to be like an apocalypse for the bees if they get over here.
Yeah, tough.
Yeah, so I don't know. There's so many problems, and you guys have foul brood over there. I mean, we have European and American foul brood. Do you guys have both of those?
Yep. Yep. It's not a big issue. It's more of an issue in New Zealand. But yeah, we definitely have it, and we're always on the lookout for that. We get it. Almonds is one of the biggest issues with foul brood. So we do the almond pollination here, and people tend to pick it up there occasionally. But they're pretty hot on it. The inspectors go around and try to make sure no one's got it. But that's probably the main issue with foul brood here. But it's not a big problem.
Oh wow, do they burn you guys as colonies like they do over here? They catch it?
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yep. So we all, I think you call them 44-gallon drums. Is that what you call them? The big drums?
Uh, we usually use 55 gallon.
Okay, right. Those big drums, most beekeepers have one on their property ready to go if you get
Hmm.
AFB. Yeah. Yeah, it's over there. And, it sort of flares up. A friend of mine was telling me recently. So, do you know what Manuka honey is?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, so Manuka honey is the big thing in New Zealand. And when it's sort of dropped off a little bit now, but 3 or 4 years ago, it was just huge prices they were getting. Like $50 a kilo for honey wasn't unheard of. And so, in the height of it, if people were sort of dropping in on each other, dumping the bees next to someone else, and you heard of people baiting other hives with AFB,
No.
yeah, so they had a bit of an outbreak during the Manuka. times with it because people were doing that.
That's terrible. Man, that's horrible. I heard from some of the old beekeepers they around here like because we have Tupelo, which is not quite like Manuka, but it's kind of big around here like Manuka is. And yeah, I used to tell me people to go out there and like spray people's beehives with diesel fuel and stuff in the middle of the night with like a pump sprayer if you move too close to their Tupelo crop. And that stuff has always been crazy. I mean, I can be angry at the beekeeper. I love bees so much. I could never like fathom killing bees, like wiping hives out to make more money or something. It's just like, how do you do that
Mm,
as a beekeeper, right? If you're keeping bees, I, I mean, you love them, I would assume. I just can't imagine. I mean, he would tell me they'd wipe out hundreds, thousands of colonies overnight. And I'm just like, man, just to what? To make a little extra money? That's crazy.
mm,
But I mean, maybe some people are just in it for the money. I don't know. Maybe they don't care.
mm. Well, yeah, so we do have that, but it's not a big issue.
Yeah. That's well, you guys are getting pretty much everything then that we've got over here.
Hmm.
That's pretty bad. Do you do any of the Manuka honey?
I don't personally. So the actual plant, the Manuka plant, it actually comes from Australia initially. There was like a lot of controversy in the last decade trying to figure out, who owns Manuka. And in New Zealand, it's famous, but the plant actually comes initially from here in Australia, and we have a few varieties of it. And there's some about 2 hours away from me, but I don't do it personally.
Does it? I'm assuming it pays a lot better than like a wildflower honey does.
It definitely used to. At the moment, I'm not sure. Like as I said, it's gone off the boil a little bit recently.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I don't, you're right. I don't hear about it as much on the news, but I mean, I swear, I used to see it on the news all the time. They were pushing it so hard, and it's in all the health food stores here. I bought a jar. It was probably a year or two ago because I was like, I gotta try this stuff. I was like, they're talking about it like it's the fountain of youth or something over here. It's a super health food, and it was good, but I was like, it tastes like a really nice honey, but I don't know. It was pretty crazy. I always wondered. I saw some videos a long time ago about like guys were like flying in beehives with
Hmm.
helicopters out in the mountains or something to get it.
Hmm.
That's crazy. I was like that. I couldn't imagine the honey being so profitable that you could get a helicopter. And the guy was like, the video I saw, the guy was only moving like two or three pallets. It's probably like 8 to 12 hives or something. I
Yep.
guess that the helicopter could carry, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And I was like, how much does that cost to get that helicopter for the day?
Yeah, oh, it's totally worth it. And they also do it for another honey in Australia called Leatherwood, which is down in Tasmania, the southern island state. They do the same
Mm.
thing. They take them in by chopper. So it's yeah, it's big business. And I was talking to this older beekeeper here in Australia before the Manuka thing really started, and he said that he found some areas where he could get some Manuka, and he said the first time we went there, and he took it out of the hives, and he was like, "Oh, we'll never sell this." Because he just didn't like the smell of it. He didn't like the taste of it. And he's like, oh, let's not come back here. And he tried to sell it and it sold really well. So, but he said his initial opinion of it was like, oh, no way. But
That's
no,
that's
people love it.
crazy. Yeah,
Mm.
some people do. There's some people around here, they love cotton honey. Like we can make cotton
Hmm.
honey. Not so much in Florida, but up in Georgia, we really can. And it crystallizes very quickly. And it's not bad, but it's nothing special. But there's some people that they really want cotton honey or they really want goldenrod honey, which I think is gross. Right? It smells like feet to me. Or we have tai, which is kind of a swamp tree that blooms really early in the year. It's one of our first big honey crops here, and it just stinks. I mean, the honey's fine, right? It tastes like honey, but the smell of it is just kind of it's very pungent. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, some people just love particular taste, and whatever. I mean, if you have a customer and they're willing to buy it, then sure, I'll put it in a bottle for you. I don't care.
Hmm.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So what do you do? You told me you were a sideliner. So what do you
Yes.
mainly focus on?
So my business is on Queens. So
Hmm.
it's Nixon Queen Bees, which is my surname. And we do queens and cells. We do a bit of honey, but we don't really sell it. I think it's important to do a little bit of everything, but we mainly focus on queens and cells, which is a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, you got to stay a little diversified. So you told me you're mostly running your queens in 5 frame nukes. That's right.
Yeah, so as just for the listeners here, we were talking before the podcast. One of the I found Matt's podcast initially because he did an episode talking about minis versus 5 frame nukes, and I'm actually going to have it's thanks for this, but I'm actually going to rerun that episode on my podcast this week, which is going to be great. And
Nice.
yeah, it's I actually use queen castles. I don't use 5 frame nukes, so
Oh,
8 frame hives split into two or three, and it's yeah they work pretty well, but if anyone's heard that podcast from Matt, they do take a lot of time to find the queening, which is one of the negatives. So
hmm
I'm doing some experiments with the minis at the moment, but yeah, I for years now I've used 8 frames split up into either two or three compartments.
Yeah, we used 3-way queen castles here in 10 frame boxes, so we would do
Hmm.
about 3 frames each, and I had such bad trouble getting them to mate equally. Like if I put in 3 cells, I would get 1 or 2 queens,
Okay.
and I had a
Yep.
lot of issues with that. And it may have been my fault, maybe our design because we built them ourselves. Maybe the queens were squeezing through the plywood walls we put in, or getting through an excluder when they were still virgins. I noticed a lot that the mating, I got best mating on like I would have 3 chambers. So starting from like the outside, I'd have chamber one, the middle chamber would be chamber two, and then chamber three would be on the other outside of the box. And I noticed I would get really good mating usually on chamber one and three. But if chamber one or three mated, chamber two, there would not be a queen in there. And then the opposite, if the middle chamber had mated, the opposing chambers wouldn't usually mate. And I never could quite figure. I don't know if the queens are just flying in the wrong entrance. I have no idea. We tried so many things that I finally just got rid of them. And well, like you said, it took a long time. And then I also was a little greedy. I thought I could double dip, so I would put an excluder on top of the on top of the box, and then I would make a deep box of honey on top of it during the honey flow. Well,
Hmm.
every time I had to go down there and cage queens, you had to pop off a 60-pound box of honey
Hmm.
to go grab a queen for a customer, and I realized that really sucks. After a while.
Hmm. Well, Ian Stepler does that. Um,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he was talking to me about that. I interviewed him about a year ago, and what he does is he has these 6 frame nukes, and he puts two 10 frame supers on top,
Hmm.
and so he puts his queen cells in, and they actually go out and they do a bit of honey for him while they're out mating.
Is he caging and selling those queens, or he's just doing
No,
that for honey?
no, it's well, basically he's creating his own queens, and
Hmm.
but at the same time they bring in a bit of honey as well.
Yeah, they definitely will. We used to make a lot. I always put deep boxes of foundation on them, and they would usually draw it out and plug it out with honey. But it just got so tedious because over here it'll be by the time that honey box is full, it's summer and it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Out here you're about to die, and then somebody calls and wants 50 queens, and then you realize you've only got 1 or 2 queens per box because they didn't mate well, but they've all got a deep box of honey on them. You just kind of go, oh, like is this worth it? So, and I didn't think
You're
it
like
was. So I said,
you're like no, got no queens today.
yeah, that's it. I was like, man, it's just not worth it. I'm sorry.
No,
You come
don't
get
have
them
them.
yourself.
It's the end of the day. Don't have queens.
Yeah, it was, it's a nice thought, but it didn't work well in practice for me. But, yeah, they will definitely make, because I guess you're going to have multiple queens down there laying. So they're just packed out with brood down there. So they shove all that honey in the supers. And, yeah, they're pretty good. I honestly I don't miss them at all. I'm glad we've gone over to the minis, and like look, I had the same problem kind of with the 5 frames. You just spend you spend 15 minutes digging around for a queen, and if somebody calls and orders 200 queens and they want to pick them up tomorrow, it's just not even physically possible unless you just call a bunch of your buddies or hire some people, to come in there and cage queens for the day. And I was like, man, this is just not working it once we started scaling up. So the minis, you can blow through the minis and be done by lunch, no problem. And enjoy it too. I take a little stool out there and I just sit there and just cage them, and honestly, it's enjoyable. And they're so small, you don't need a smoker. You don't really even need a hive tool. You don't need a bee suit. You can just wear a little veil, hat and veil, and that's about it. and it's actually pretty peaceful, and I actually enjoy it. My wife helps me cage them, and she doesn't like being in the hives that much, but she'll actually ask to go cage the queens because it's just such a pleasant experience since we've converted to those minis. So I sure like having an extra pair of hands helping me cage them.
That's certainly a nice part of beekeeping is finding mated queens.
It is nice, and I don't know. Do you guys have a lot in my area? There's really up here in the north, and I'm in northern Florida, and there are no queen breeders around here. The closest one is Gardner Apiaries up in Georgia, and then we've got one further down, and I think they're in southern central Florida. You have Miska. They're pretty big,
Hmm.
but kind of up here in northern Florida, it's just like there's nothing. It's just an absolute void outside of people just doing a little bit on the side. There's nobody trying to
Oh,
like fill
you
in
got
that
the
production
Woners.
spot. Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're here too.
Hmm.
And but yeah, I still think they're down further. They're still down in like the southern central part, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they're here in northern Florida. I'll have to check. But I don't know, around here there's not. Definitely not locally. So we're trying to fill in that gap there. But I don't know. Do you guys have like how is the queen breeding over there? Do you guys have like a lot of competition?
It's mainly in northern New South Wales and Queensland, which are the states north of me, just
Mm,
because the conditions are ideal. So the guy who taught me queen breeding is a guy called Joe Horner. He lives in the Blue Mountains, which is about an hour and a half west of Sydney, and the conditions are just fantastic. They don't ever have to feed. It's there's so much for them to forage, and that's probably why they're all there. And so I don't have a lot of competition down my way. There's not a lot of queen breeders in the state of Victoria where I am. And that's been a bit of a challenge since Varroa came because the borders have all shut down. So a lot of people in my state have had to sort of start raising their own queens all of a sudden. So we have
mm,
a really good Facebook group that we've put together, Queen Bee Rearing Australia, where we're trying to help each other and learn about that. So I'm actually doing a talk next week doing introduction to queen rearing here in
mm.
Australia. So a lot of people are having to learn how to do it. There's a state, Tasmania, they traditionally got all their queens from New South Wales and Queensland. And then the state said, all right, we're shutting the borders and we're probably never opening them again. Unlike us in Victoria, the borders will probably open again soon. We'll be able to bring queens back in from New South Wales. Tasmania, they're never going to open again because they're an island state. And now with Varroa here in the mainland, they've said, okay, that's it. We're just doing it here now. So everyone in that state's having to learn, and there's a sort of a vacuum for queen breeders in that state. So we'll probably
Yeah.
see a few people open up new businesses in the next couple of years to deal with that. But yeah, certainly there's certain areas of Australia that are just really good for it, like New South Wales.
And they how long is the breeding season for the queens, would you say there?
And that's part of it. They've just got a longer season than us. So
Mm.
it's the opposite for you guys in terms of, the further you go south, the longer your season is. And here, the further you go north. So they're doing it, I think, about 8 months, 9 months of the year if you go up into Queensland. And there's a couple of there's this one breeder up in Northern Territory who can do it all year long, I think.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, that's what we're trying to kind of figure out on our end over here. It's like how long can we, reliably produce, decent queens, especially if we're going to sell them to the public. And like I said, we're still raising them right now. The mating rates aren't super high. At last I took the time to count, which has been a few weeks. We were getting like maybe a 50% mating rate, but the queen cells are still reliably producing. They're looking pretty good, and I'm fine even if it's a 50% mating rate. I mean, that's still a nice little trickle of new blood coming in. To pinch old queens are probably not going to make splits this time of year for us, but yeah, those queens are so valuable when you have them, and don't really want to shut it down just because it's nice every week you got another little batch. And if you can go out to the bee yard and have 20 fresh queens with you, I mean, it's so nice when you come across that queenless colony and you can chunk her in, or that queen that's missing a leg, and she's limping around. You can pinch her and replace her. And
Hmm.
it's like I don't know, it just feels like insurance, when you go out there, and we're still pushing them. I just don't know. What worries me is like the sperm viability. Well, I guess not the viability, but how much sperm are those queens collecting during their mating flights? Are they going to give out in a month or 2 months, and become drone layers? I just have no idea because we've never mated queens now, like in November. We mated them all the way through October last year, and they did pretty darn good. And the weather's cooperating with us, and I'm seeing drones everywhere. So I don't know why it wouldn't be good. I just don't know.
Hmm.
I was going to ask you on that too, because that's because you're selling queens to the public, right? Or are you just using them
Hmm.
yourself?
No, no, I sell
Yeah.
them. Yep.
Yeah, how do you handle? I was going to ask because you're really the first person that I've spoken to who does breed their own queens and sells them to the public. Like I said,
Hmm.
around here there's nobody. How
Hmm.
do you handle your kind of guarantees to the customer, like in relation to if they buy a queen and they don't put it in the hive, say right away, and it dies in their possession, or if it fails to get accepted, or if it turns into a drone layer 2 weeks after they're installed? How do you handle those issues?
I just replace them. It doesn't happen very often. The biggest issue I have is queens dying in the post. That's the biggest problem I have. So people, the queens will arrive and they'll be dead. And it used to happen more a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. It was really bad with COVID. The postal system just got really, really bad, and so that was a big issue for me. And a lot of my friends stopped selling them through the post entirely, and they would say you can only pick them up, which was and we also had a few people just driving them around the state, just dropping them off with everyone. So that was the biggest problem. These days it's a lot better, but yeah, I just replace them if that happens. I'm the drone laying thing. I'm cautious of, so I don't sell them as early in the season as other people do, and I don't sell them as late in the season as other people do because I know that's an issue. I Yeah, one year I took some queens out to a really isolated area, and I don't think I had enough drones to for them. And within 6 months, that entire group of queens were drone layers, and it was really frustrating. So I can see it's something you really have to watch out for. And so I'm just careful. That's one thing I'm really careful about. Uh, but in terms of yeah, if they die in transit or in the first few days, I'll just replace them. And usually, yeah, and in my terms and conditions, I say to people that you have to sort of send me a photo on the day you get them and all this kind of stuff. And I've never had issues with people sort of hanging on to them for a week or so and then complaining. Usually people are pretty good about that. But yeah, the only issue I really have had is them dying in the post, and that's not that common. Maybe one in 50, maybe 1 in 100. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not bad. We started just adding 5% extra queens to each order, which to kind of account for that on our side, which from what I've spoken to other people online about it, that seems to be kind of the industry standard over, on our side, anyways,
Hmm.
over here in America, that you generally expect about a 5% extra at a certain scale. Obviously, if somebody buys one queen, I don't know, am I going to give you another one? Probably not, but probably whenever that 5% makes sense. And it seems to cover us because yeah, we'll have the same problem. We'll mail some, and there'll be like one that will be dead. But if they've got a backup queen, then you know, they're happy.
Hmm.
It's okay. And I don't know. We're still trying to work on that. The other problem, I've had two problems really, is that one, we have, because there's no queen breeders in my immediate local area, there's a lot of people who are buying mated queens from me for their first time. They've
Hmm.
never handled them. They've always used queen cells or let the bees make their own queens. And what they'll do is they'll show up and they'll buy a queen, but they haven't made their split or they haven't pinched their queen. And if they got one hive, they can knock that out. But if a guy's buying like 20 queens and he's got to run out there and pinch 20 old queens
Hmm.
to install them, and maybe he's a little bit slower and it takes him 2 or 3 days, he'll call me and be like, hey man, some of these queens died, in the cage. And I'm like, well, did you put it in the hive? No, no, they
Hmm.
haven't done that yet. And I had a guy, and it's drove me crazy. I had a guy, this was earlier this year, he bought a handful of queens from me, and something similar happened. He couldn't, for whatever reason, he couldn't install them. So he threw the cages in his sock drawer of his house. And but he didn't give them any food. He didn't give them any water. There were no nurse bees to take care of them. And he called me and was like, "Hey man, they died in my sock drawer." And it'd been like a couple of
Hmm.
days or something. And I was like, "Well, they're living creatures. They need food, water, and ideally nurse
Hmm.
bees to take care of them." And I was like, "I'm sorry." And I've kind of had that. I've kind of learned to. You can kind of tell if somebody's fairly new. They seem a little nervous maybe about buying it. They ask a lot of questions, and I'll just say, "Hey, have you ever taken care of queens?" I try to give like a quick explanation on how to bank them, or I'll sell them like a little box that I can, shake some bees in, and I'll say, "Hey, give them a little sugar and a little sponge with the water," and they get pretty good results with that. It's just taking care of them, especially if it's going to rain or something. But I've really just learned. I try to tell them like, "Look, have your splits made, have your queens pinched, and I'll just keep the queens here in my bank." And then you can just run and install them. That's going to get your best success. But the other problem I had recently, and that's why this is where I wanted to ask you, is how to handle it, or how do you guys handle it over there, is we've had pretty good luck with our queen acceptance, putting it into a queenless colony and it getting taken correctly by the bees. I've been telling people we get at least about a 90% acceptance. Sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower, but on average, I expect 9 out of 10 queens will get accepted and be laying in all as well. And we had a guy the other day. He bought like 15 queens, and I think almost 100% of them did not get accepted or close to it. And everything that I've learned about queen breeding is that queen acceptance it's not 100% the beekeeper side of things, but it usually is almost 100% the hive they're being put into, right? Like the state, whether it has the right brood, the right amount of nurse bees, if there's a nectar flow, are you feeding them, all these other factors. And of course the guy wanted a refund. And I just said, I know my queens were caged. They were mated. We pulled them at 3 weeks. I caged them myself. They spent one night in a queen bank. And usually I find if a queen has an issue, the bank will, not take care of them. They'll be dead the next day. And I kind of just stood my ground on it, but it became kind of a big issue. And it was the first really complaint that I've had with the queens all year. And in the end, I stood my ground because I know the queens were good as far as you can know that as a breeder. And I don't know, but how would you handle that situation?
15 out of 15. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's not your fault. There's something going on there for sure. I mean, because I've had some, again, in COVID, a friend sent me some queens and they came like 2 weeks after he sent them. And they were pretty much every cage had all the attendants were dead. I didn't find a single attendant alive. Um, about half the queens were dead, and there was half of them were just clinging on. And I thought, oh, God, they were really good queens. I still wanted to give it a go. And so I made my splits and put them in, and I still got mostly. I think they mostly got accepted, even under those conditions. So I think it's. I mean, you can have a reduction in acceptance under certain conditions, but if it's none, then there's definitely something that's going on there, and I don't think it's your fault at all.
I've never had it either. And what's crazy is we sold 20 queens from that same week's batch to another guy and he got 100% acceptance. And then the next week, a guy, I think it was the week
Hmm.
after, a guy did have a 35% failed acceptance, but it was his first time installing queens. And he was like, well, I don't know if I did something right. And I was like, well, okay, that was a little higher than I would have wanted. But I was like, and of course, I take samples every week and use them in my own colonies. And I don't see them right away because it takes me 4 weeks to get around to them. So I'm always running a little behind. But I would have seen if there was a batch that was like that severely
Yeah.
bad. And it's just I don't know. It blew up. It became a big to do. And I was like, I think I called four other beekeepers in my area. One of them used to raise queens like many years ago, and they all kind of said what you said. It was probably something on the hive they were put into. But I don't have another queen breeder to speak to kind of ask like what's the industry standard to handle those kind of complaints. And because of course you can just give the guy his money back. You can just give the guy 15 more queens. But I'm gonna be in that issue. I may have that problem again in the future. And I'm like, do I want to set that precedent that I'm going to cover mismanagement is how I saw it on the beekeeper side. just so they don't complain and drag your name through the
Hmm.
mud, basically. And that was the only motivation I had. And I don't know. It was very frustrating. That's what made me a little nervous, to even if I should even keep selling
Hmm.
queens to the public this late in the season. And I haven't been. I'm using them myself, but I'm not advertising that we have them or anything. We're just kind of using them because I'm like, let me be 1,000% certain, that the queens are good quality, so I don't get in that situation again. But it's hard. I mean, it's hard to deal with the public, and in those queens, there's so many things that can go wrong. On our side as the breeder, and on their side as the beekeeper. There's just like a million hurdles you've got to get across to get that queen into that hive, and it to be good quality.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to like calculate all the different variables, right? And to kind of get that good queen to that customer
Hmm.
where they're happy. And that has been the biggest struggle to me. It's not learning the queen breeding side of things. I feel pretty confident about that. It's getting it to the customer and making sure they're happy and their expectations are met.
It's interesting. A friend of mine, and this is a little off topic, but he just started selling things on Facebook Marketplace, and this guy,
Hmm.
he hadn't ever done it before, and he was selling a table tennis table, and he sold it. And I said, "How did it go?" And he's, "Oh, so annoying. People wanted to ask questions about it. People wanted to come and see it." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're selling something. That's just how it is with sales." And I have a lot of customer service, so I talk to people a lot on the phone, and I talk to people mostly. Most days, I'll talk to someone and usually people want to know how to introduce the queen, and I have some really good sort of leaflets that I hand out with the queens, but still people want to give me a call. And the biggest issue I have is people not being able to find the queen. And I sell to a lot of hobbyists,
Yeah.
so I do a lot of single queen sales, and that's the biggest thing. And I talk to
Mhm.
people every week about how to find the queen, and I've got a lot of sort of tricks and tips that I can give people, but it is customer service is pretty much constant. And that's just the same with selling any product. And a lot of people that I know who are beekeepers, they'll sell their nukes wholesale or their honey wholesale just because they don't want to deal with that at all. But if you're selling to the public, customer
Yeah.
service is just one of those things that it's just constant.
It is. Yeah. It's that pamphlet thing. That's a good idea. Have you noticed that has helped at
I
all?
send it with every order, and eventually I'm going to do some videos as well, so people can have a little QR code they can link straight to the video. And it's just and you could relate to this. The list of things that you want to do is really long, and so it's one thing that I will do eventually. Instead of having a list, I'll just have a QR code. People can scan it and they can watch a video on how to do it. But yeah, despite having that, people will still call me up and ask, and I'm happy to talk to them. I love talking bees, and I'm happy to talk to people. And there's a lot of things that you can do because, a lot of times people have a hive that they haven't requeened ever and it's really, really angry and they're in a suburban situation. They just have to do it. And the queen isn't marked, you know, the combs are all everywhere and it's just a really hard task for them. So, I talk a few people through that.
Mhm.
And I do have a few issues with, as I said, queens dying in the post and sometimes they're not accepted, but I've never had a situation where I've sent out a bunch of queens and none of them were accepted. I haven't had that yet, or at least no one's called me up and admitted to it. There are situations where not exactly that, but I have had situations where I've just given people a refund and said, "Look, okay," and we just try to move on from it.
Yeah, a friend of mine told me that he buys, I can't remember the name of the breeder, but they're a big commercial breeder. And what they'll do, which I thought was a pretty good idea as well, is they'll give that customer, if they have a bad experience, just like a credit for like a future purchase. So if a customer calls and says, hey, whatever, 10 of the 15 queens didn't get installed and they're throwing a fit, they'll just give that customer a credit for 10 queens, so they're still kind of having to come back and do some business with you. Um, and but you're not having to give them a full refund, and you don't always have those queens on hand. That's the problem. I don't always have a surplus that I can cover an order or a larger order. If it's a queen or two, yeah, fine. I probably got it. But like with that guy that had the 15, he was our third order that week. I didn't have anything left, even if I wanted to. And there just wasn't an option. So it just kind of shut down that
Mhm.
discussion. But I thought the credit thing was kind of nice.
Yeah, you can't please everybody, and I've never had such a very bad experience with selling queens, and I think it's also because I do the podcast. I'm on social media a lot. I think people sort of have a bit of a relationship with me, even if I don't know them, and I think that that means that I don't have as many issues as people would if they weren't known around the community. But occasionally, I think back to one situation where, again, Facebook Marketplace, we bought something off someone and we left the money under his under a pot plant on his front doorstep, and he called us up like 2 hours later, just screaming, like, "Where's my money? Where's my $20?" And this had nothing to do with bees, but they were like, "Oh, we should put it under the pot plant." And they're like, "The pot plant? I told you to put it under the mat." And I was
Oh,
like, "Oh man, luckily I haven't had someone with like that with bees." Because it's a nice little community.
yeah.
But some people are just a bit angry. It's just part of sales. You're just dealing with upset people sometimes. Yeah, don't worry about that. Just move on from it. It's all good.
Well, hey, you mentioned when we were emailing back and forth, and I know you mentioned earlier about Joe Horner.
Yeah,
Was that his
yep,
name was correct? The guy that
yes,
taught you? You said he had something called like a delayed mating thing for the queens
yeah,
that he invented.
yeah. So Joe Horner and his son Wayne Horner, they've got this system. It's called delayed mating. And so what they do is do you want me to explain the whole system? It's really, really cool. So I'm not sure if it's anywhere else in the world. Some people refer to it as moonlight mating. And I've seen a few studies, but as far as I know, they're the only ones in the world who do it, and I'm pretty sure they've invented it. And basically, what happens is they've got this really, really big rural property outside in the Blue Mountains, and it's I don't know how big it is, but it's at least a few hundred acres. And up in the hills, they've got a clearing where there's a shed, and it's insulated. So they've got little diesel generated there, and they keep the shed insulated to 15 degrees Celsius, which I think is about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And the mating nukes, they're in there all day until about 5 o'clock. And at 5 o'clock, they come out on little train tracks, which is really, really cool to see. You see the mating nukes, they're four-way mating nukes, so 10 frame boxes split into four ways. And they come out on these little train tracks in all directions, and they go into their own specific spot. And so they go out and they do the orientation flight. They come back in, then they go back into the shed for the night, and then the next day they come out again to the very same spot on these little railway lines, and then the drones get released, and it's called delayed mating because it happens after all the feral drones in the area have gone back into their hives, and it's really cool. It doesn't get 100% like artificial insemination does, but the results are pretty amazing. They've got the best reputation in Australia in terms of queens, and it's just amazing quality queens.
So they're just really controlling the genetics as closely as they
Yep,
can without
and
artificial
and
insemination.
but they're able to do hundreds of queens at once. So that's a lot of people when I talk to them about this, they say, well, why wouldn't you just do insemination? Well, one of the benefits is they're doing hundreds of queens at once. So, but I mean, obviously, it's something that not everyone can do. You have to have the property, and these
Yeah.
guys are they're just obsessed with their job. Joe Horner is in his mid 70s, and I went up and worked with him for a week a few years ago. And I think the first day that we started work was a Sunday, and it was about 6 a.m. in the morning we started, and we're still going at 9 o'clock that night on a Sunday. And he's in his mid 70s, so you know it's he does it because he loves it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you have to. We have a guy like that here, and he's in his 80s, and he's still out there teaching classes, giving talks at the bee clubs, and yeah, I don't know if it keeps you young, and maybe it's just gets you out of bed in the morning, but we have some beekeepers here, man. They're tough, and they just power through, regardless of how old they've gotten. I hope I can still be that
Is
energetic
it
as some of
Ted
these
Miska
guys.
who's near you? I heard a podcast with him once. He's been doing it. He's been doing it for a long time.
Oh yeah, 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 from Miska, yeah, the Queen Breeders, yeah. No, I've never met him. There's a guy here in a town called Elmore Herman. He's been doing it in this area for. I always make fun. He said he's been doing it for about 300 or 400 years. So, but yeah, I think Elmore is probably in his mid 80s, and he runs like a bee supply store, and he's kind of one of the main beekeepers around here. But they're not. I think Elmore only runs about 800 colonies.
Mhm.
So they're not like massive, massive. I don't know if you would know all the way to Australia, but around here, he's really well respected,
Mhm.
and he does a lot for the beekeeping community. He's always, said he's always helping out the bee clubs, and he donates a lot of equipment, and he does a lot of classes for new beekeepers. So everybody really likes him a lot, but he's still at it.
Oh, great. And another cool program we've got in Australia is the Western Australian breeding program. So it also doesn't rely on artificial insemination. And we were talking about this program the other day as well. But basically, the way that program works is all of the commercial beekeepers in Western Australia, which is a very isolated part of Australia, they're not allowed to have any queens come in and out from the other parts of the country. And it's separated from the rest of the country by a very sort of arid desert. So it's sort of like its own little island. But all the beekeepers over there, they get together once a year and they go over to an island. They take their drone colonies over, and then a couple of weeks later they take their mating nukes over, and that's how they do their breeding stock for the whole season. So that's a pretty cool program as well.
That sounds awesome.
Mm.
Yeah, that's so you guys can really I mean and with all that going on, is there any ever like concern of inbreeding at all with the bees or is the genetics pretty diverse?
Well, in Western Australia, they haven't had any stock coming in. I think it's for about 30 or 40 years. There's been a few
Wow.
people bring in some drone lines, but I don't think they've had much in for the last 30 or 40 years. And uh, it's 10 commercial beekeepers, I think, and they take over about 1,000 different drone combs from a bunch of different lines. So they've got a fairly big genetic diversity.
That's great. So do you guys have if you haven't had that much new blood in a while, like what do you guys consider your breed? Do you have like kind of the breeds we have here? You'll have, Italian, Carniolan, Buckfast, all that, or is it kind of unique to Australia?
Yeah, so a lot of stuff came into Australia in the early 1900s. So we had a lot of
Mhm.
stuff coming in, and it was about the sort of 1960s, which was the last stuff that really came into Australia before they started shutting borders. And we didn't get buckfast, unfortunately. So we don't have any buckfast as far as I know, but we do have all of those other traditional lines.
That's cool. Are there people who are kind of breeding them to kind of keep them pure, or are they just mixed and just a hybrid? It almost sounds like you guys have like your own strain now because you've been isolated so much.
Um, well, Joe Horner, once again, he's probably the most well-known queen breeder in Australia, and he hasn't brought anything in for I think his whole career since he started. So he started off with a
Wow.
certain amount of lines, and he hasn't brought anything in since, and he's got the best reputation. So, but once again, he does a huge amount of colonies. I think he's got about 750 colonies, which is a lot here in Australia, and he calls them his genetic bank. So he keeps quite a few colonies just as a genetic bank. So every hive he has is a potential breeder, and that's how he hangs on to his breeding stock. And he's really obsessed about making sure the lines are kept pure. So, and when I was up there last time with him, I was there with my dad, and he was like, "Check out this one. Can you see the red on that one? Can you see that?" And we're like, "No, we can't." But he was really into it. So yeah, he really tries to maintain his lines. I personally, I'm not really big on that. I'm looking for certain traits,
Hmm.
and I'm not really if there's a bit of color variation, it doesn't really bother me. I'm really just sort of selecting for traits. And it's interesting. Talking about Adam Finkelstein again, which was the guy. He's in South Carolina over there. I was talking to him about it, and he said if people want an Italian queen from him, he just finds a yellow one.
That's kind of true. There really are no like pure subspecies in North America at all anymore. I don't know.
Yeah.
Have you heard, do you know Dr. Jamie Ellis? He's with the University of Florida here.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. He does a podcast,
Yeah,
right?
he does. Yeah, the two bees in the
Yeah.
podcast. Yeah, he
That's a really good
I love
podcast, by
that
the way.
one. I listen to it all the time, and
Hmm.
I want to meet him so bad. He comes to some of the bee clubs around here sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I'm always
Hmm.
busy, and I'm like, I just want to meet this guy because he's like a little celebrity in our area as far as bee research goes. And but he had a great episode on that podcast about genetic diversity in here in North America, and they really kind of railed on that yeah, there are no like pure Italians, pure Buckfast, any of that stuff here at all. Everything
Hmm.
is hybridized to more, to a more greater or lesser degree. And it is that case. Yeah, you see people who are, yeah, the Italians is a perfect example. People think of Italian and they think it's just this shiny yellow golden queen. And who knows? I mean, we never selected for color or anything like that either. And I even if I wanted to do anything remotely like your Joe Horner does, we never could because at least here in Florida, you can throw a rock and you'll hit like half a dozen beekeepers. They're
Hmm.
everywhere. There's a one the bee farm I started at, Sleeping Bear apiaries. They're 2 miles down the road. They're mostly based out of Michigan, but they keep some colonies down here. But they run, last I checked, like 8,000 hives, and they're everywhere. And then there's like the cuts. They're just a few miles down the road too. Ryan, the guy that's taken over this family apiary, he's fifth generation. So they've been here. There's just tons of beekeepers. And I struggle sometimes to find a bee yard that I'm even a mile or two away from another beekeeper's yard in the area. And not because it's good honey area, just because there's just so many people have their shops here. So people are keeping them close by.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think for us, so some people may not like that if they want to keep it pure line, but to me, I'm like, well, our gene pool is so diverse, and that could be good or bad. But I generally like to think it's good, um, because especially because I know like Sleeping Bear, they buy queens from Hawaii and all over the U.S. and stuff. I know they're buying those expensive queens, so I always laugh and I go, yeah, I'm mating with his expensive drones, over here, because I'm sure his drones are flying to my nuke yard over here at the house because we're so close. So I'm like, he can pay for
Yeah.
the expensive genetics, and I'll reap the benefits from it. But
I, I I actually had someone buy cells off me once, and I said, oh, it was a sort of later in the season. I said, oh, make sure you've got plenty of drone colonies. And he said, oh, he mentioned this other queen breeder that we both knew of, and he's like, I know where his mating site is. I'm just going to put all my mating nukes around there.
it's a good idea. Why not? I mean, yeah, maybe not good for the breeder, I guess, but
Which is, oh yeah, I thought that was funny.
there's probably plenty of drones to go around. I don't ever see much of a we the only time I saw where we had zero drones here was in August for us, and that was like, in my opinion, that's the worst month here in Florida. It's just like an absolute dearth. Nothing. No rain, no pollen, no nectar. The bees are just like the hives are just dropping dead left and right. I had no drones. We had some pretty bad mating then, but then you got fall coming in, and before that, you're just coming off the spring flow, and it's just huge drone numbers, which, of course, here, and you'll find out, unfortunately, probably soon, when you start seeing huge drone numbers, that means you're going to have huge mite numbers. So your queens start mating really well. That's usually a sign to go out there and start, medicating for mites, unfortunately. Well, shoot, man, that's about all. I had like a list of questions, and I got everything I can think of. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Well, thanks again for having me on the show. As I said at the start of the episode, really appreciate what you're doing. That video or that podcast you did about the economics of beekeeping, I think that's really good for the community. Stuff like that, and keep people sort of get a first-hand look at. There's plenty of content on YouTube and even podcasts about how to keep bees, but there's not a lot about how to do a business with beekeeping,
Yeah.
and I think that's where people are struggling with a lot. So thanks for doing that.
Oh yeah, no, no, thanks for listening, and thanks for all the, yeah, I mean, I know it was before we were recording, but I appreciate all the advice and stuff you gave me. It sounds like, yeah, you figured out a lot of the things I'm kind of stumbling around trying to figure out with the podcast too, and how to expand it a bit. And like I said, you're my first international interview, so that's kind of a big deal for me. I feel excited. I'm gonna tell everybody I interviewed an Australian guy. Oh, and I got to say this because my wife will want me to tell you is that we've never been to Australia. Unfortunately, I really want to go, but we have a couple reptiles from there. We've got a bearded dragon, and
Oh, cool. Yep.
we've got a frill dragon over there from
Yep.
there, and we love them. They're awesome. So. I'm sure those poor lizards have never seen their homeland. They were probably bred in a store, I'm sure. But
Yeah, they're probably very happy, I imagine.
I want to go see like a wild bearded dragon because ours is he's so lazy. He just sits around and eats all day and doesn't do much. Like I'm like
Hmm.
he falls asleep, you can pick him up and throw him in the air and and he'll never move budget. And I'm like there's no way they're like that in the wild because he's so like chill. I was like, man, he would get eaten in a heartbeat over there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see them on the roads. They're not in my area, but yeah, they're pretty quick on the roads from when I've been up north.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, we want to go check those out and I don't know, you guys have so much cool wildlife over there. It's insane.
Yeah, well, yeah, feel free to come and stay here whenever you want.
Oh yeah, we need to get over there and get out of here for a little bit. I need a vacation, but as you probably know, the bees don't ever seem to want to let you have time off.
No, I mean, it's a pretty demanding job, but it's a fun job,
It is.
you know.
I love it. All right. Well, thanks so much, Brent, and hopefully we'll have this episode out here pretty soon. And yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you. I learned a lot.
No worries. Well, thanks again for having me.
Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Pollination Podcast. I'm Matthew Walker from Walk in the Woods Apiary. We hope we have answered a few of your beekeeping and pollinator questions. Please share your questions and comments to our Facebook page at the Pollination Podcast.